Greetings, viewers, and welcome to the Legal Academy. The Legal Academy's prime aim is to equip you with knowledge scarce elsewhere. For this month's Legal Academy, we hope to give you an insight into the human rights scene in Malaysia. Hence, without further ado, let us get to Know Your Rights. Good afternoon, Mr. Chiu, the Program Manager of SORAM, and Mr. Sia, the People Before Benefit Coordinator of SORAM. We are grateful to have you both here this afternoon to help us know our rights. So let us start off with a little introduction on human rights in Malaysia. Mr. Chiu, would you like to?
Yeah, so human rights is a pretty ethereal topic. It is, in general, what we say the idea of human dignity. It wasn't something that's very modern, even though it's something that has always been inherently spoken about through, say, the concept of natural justice or what's a person's fundamental liberties are. It's always been there to some extent in national documents like Constitution of the US or the French Constitution. But it is, as a human rights, as a whole topic of its own, it's very new. It only really surfaced in the late 40s, mostly after in the post-war eras. So it came out as the idea that fundamentally every person as a human being should have basic dignity. Mm-hmm. And that dignity can only be fulfilled in the sense that if you have human rights. And what human rights then is a series of rights that you must have or you ought to have as an individual. It is not granted by any state or any government or any power, but it is inherent in you because you're a human or a person. So that is a very basic foundation of human rights.
So for this basic foundation of human rights, how did it actually come about in Malaysia?
So in Malaysia, for us, it came about very naturally to our constitution. Our constitution was obviously drafted in the era after the war. Mm-hmm. So there is some elements of fundamental liberties, but at the same time, it was still very early during the phase of post-war era. So fundamental liberties or human rights as a language was not very common yet. And we must remember that constitution for us that introduced all these rights was drafted by the British Red Commission, and it has some feedback from Malaysia itself. So it doesn't really encapsulate the whole range of human rights idea like what you see in the European Declaration of Human Rights or even the UN's language. Because those technically come at a later age and only got them widespread adoption after our independence. So that's why you see Article 5 to 10, give or take around there, is where our fundamental liberties are. And those 5 articles are the one that's interpreted to cover most of our UDHR rights. So essentially your right to fair trial, your right to expression, and etc.
Can you explain a little more on what those rights are within the articles?
So the most biggest prominent one is always the right to security and life. Mm-hmm. So that's the foundation one. The idea is, if you don't have your right to life, if the government can arbitrarily arrest you or cause harm to you, then there's no way your other rights can be fulfilled. So that's one of the big ones that you have. And obviously we also have the right to equality before the law, which actually encompasses a lot of things, including discrimination at workplace, racial discrimination, religious discrimination, or even just discrimination on ideas. You have your Article 10 that most people have heard about, your freedom of expression, assembly, and association. So in general, those few rights encapsulate most of what is foundation for you to have the rest of your rights. Because from there you can derive your right to have a labor union, your right to education, your right to healthcare. They all can be derived from that 3 key items.
Those 3 key items.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so let's move on. So, Mr. Sia, what are the stereotypes you would say that people have in mind when it comes to their rights? Just for example, freedom of speech. Sometimes my parents say that, oh, I can't say this, I can't say that, I'll be penalized for this or for that. So what is your take on that?
Yep, definitely say the example you cited was probably accurate 90s, early 2000s. Definitely getting less over the times because even in grassroots movement, you're starting to see more youth involvement in human rights and politics in general. But stereotypes, I think, some boundaries are still the status quo because the government in some way enforces it quite clearly. Religion is still off the tables, royalty. So these are kind of still pre-existing. And
so are those things we cannot actually talk about, but we should have the right to talk about in that sense?
Would say definitely, but until the law has been reformed to allow this, as in where people don't feel threatened or in fear of prosecution of saying it, unfortunately I would say the stereotype would still persist in some.
I see. So is there something that actually stops us from saying all these kind of things? Because since this is our fundamental right, so aren't we supposed to be permitted to say it whenever and whatever we want in that sense?
That's definitely ideal, but like I would say the Sedition Act still in force, and until this repealed, there will always be that little constant threat looming over the horizon.
So is this thing like known to everyone, or is that like because sometimes people think that due to like certain news which may be fake or true, they have it in mind like just because someone did that, they go to jail or something like that. So then they refrain from doing that sort of act, refrain from like having the courage to take one step forward, like probably you guys.
I would say actually yes, on a cultural level, in Malaysia you will notice as a society we're quite cautious in commenting on these issues, as in you don't want to touch the wrong sensitivities or anything, but those that do mention on it occasionally can be quite malicious, as in it's quite obvious they're going out their way for it. It's not just a, how to say, slip of the mouth kind of thing where they have it as a normal conversation. So it's still not normalized in the sense that it's something we discuss every day. I mean, barring some fields of work like ours, but yeah.
There are actually like something within our constitution that allows for our rights to be infringed, right, under certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. So like, in that sense, isn't it a bit unfair?
Well, I mean, there's always the issue, like, because your rights allows you to express yourself. But the question always is, what happens if your expression of your own rights infringes on another person's right? So when you look at exemption to the rule, say you have freedom of expression, but there's something you cannot express. It must always, or it should always be viewed from the lens that you're not necessarily protecting the person by fulfilling their rights per se, but you also need to think about the other person around them, the society, community at large. Would they be harmed by this person's expression? So some country takes a very conservative or a very limited expression or interpretation of it. So like Malaysia, for example, the moment it threatens a very arbitrary or a very ambiguous public safety, for example, immediately it's something you cannot talk about. If you go to some place like Europe, they will not have such a broad, ambiguous term that allows, say, public safety, so you cannot comment. But then the thing is, you would have situations where if someone is uttering hate speech or driving a political party that is racial discrimination in nature, like say for example Nazism, you would immediately have a big, no, this is not your expression, that's where your expression ends. But then you go to somewhere more liberal like the US, where it's a bit borderline insane. It's that anyone can say anything and there's very little repercussion for it. So it's a skill that depends on which country you want to go and how you want to go. But you would have that kind of length or distance there. But then all of it starts from the same point. You have a right, but the right ends when it infringes on another person's right.
I see. So like, do you think that this system within Malaysia is fair for now?
For now, for Malaysia, it's very, very bad. One, our constitution was drafted in an era where rights or fundamental liberties or how it's interpreted is not well developed. But over the years, that was also exacerbated by a lot of court decisions. Like say, for example, Azmi Sharom decision on Sedition Act a while ago. That is still a binding precedent on us. And essentially, that law just says the court has no need to consider proportionality of the law itself in addressing the need of the community against the right of the person. But the proportionality is determined when Parliament passes the law. So if Parliament can pass it, it means anything goes. There's no need for the court to consider whether this law is proportional to the aim of it.
But Parliament hasn't passed any law so far against that.
Yeah, they haven't. So the Sedition Act still stands. So the definition of proportion there still stands. And even if, say, Sedition Act was abolished, the jurisprudence on proportionality that used to be a part of our law is no longer there anymore in that sense. So until a new case comes out and challenges that position, they're stuck with it.
So for now, as like laypersons or maybe paralegals or legals, we actually can't do anything against that, right?
Well, until another guy gets charged for sedition and challenges it all the way up there again. So, or either that or some other cases where proportionality is called into question. But circumstances of those coming up is actually quite rare, because if you think about it, you either need something that infringes on your fundamental liberty, and the justification is threat to public security or safety. So unless you have that kind of context, it's very hard for you to use this justification and say this is not proportionate.
But isn't it very discretionary, I would say, in nature, in that sense?
The proportionality?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But that's the thing, when you look at jurisprudence over a period of time, actually there is a limit or a circle that's drawn over time. So it's something that, yeah, it's grey in the sense that you won't know where the line is and you can only draw the line after it happens. But when you go to court later on and look at the individual fact of the case, it becomes quite clear over time, like what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is considered proportionate, and what's not considered proportionate. Like there's something that are quite apparent immediately. Like say for example, if there is one news media that publishes fake news actively, and because of that you introduce a law that requires everyone to register themselves, and anyone that is not registered as a journalist cannot write news. And if they write news, they can be prosecuted. it immediately was seen as very disproportionate because you're trying to prevent fake news, but the thing is you're penalizing everyone. So some things are very clear cut, but then you go to something that's more ambiguous, like say for example, your right to peaceful assembly. What if a party that promotes violence against another group decides to do a rally? They'll say it's my freedom of assembly. But then proportionally, is it fair to restrict that and say you cannot assemble because your aim or objective is threatening violence against others or promoting violence against others? So then it becomes a bit grayer because they can just say it's a peaceful assembly. Yes, maybe my message is a bit rough around the edges, but it's still my right.
So it's like both sides of the spectrum in that sense. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So let's move on. This will be a bit more personal. So like, what actually made you a human rights advocate? Like, why human rights out of all things throughout the years?
Personally, for me, I would say in terms of the positions I take in various issues, I'm quite a hard-headed person. So in some way, human rights profession would be more conscientious in the sense that, say, in legal practice, quite sure you heard of the example where if you're in criminal, you might have to defend a murderer. You don't agree with it, you don't like it, but professionally you're bound to. And it's one of those situations I would say almost never come across in this line of work. As in, if someone is wrong, you can very clearly tell them to the face, yes, you did wrong.
See. So you're doing it more in the sense of justice, I would say? Like, personally, you feel?
On a personal level, yeah, probably.
I see.
Or at least it's something in the more simple terms, I don't feel bad doing it.
Okay.
Like, if I play devil's advocate, it's because I want to and not because I'm forced to.
So it's more of like, if it's for you, it's for you kind of thing.
Basically, it aligns more comfortably with my interests.
I see. What about you, Mr. Chu?
My interest started off as an academic interest in that sense, choosing to study human rights in a master's level. But coming to professional working in the field itself is pure chance. Essentially, I applied for an internship position and ended up with a permanent job and been stuck here since. But why would I stay in it for all this time? I think the interest, the cause itself is always worthwhile. But I think as any human, regardless of what profession you're in, even in human rights, you need to feel that you are achieving something to some extent, or you are feeling you're well utilized, or not, you will not feel happy about your work environment in that sense, right? So I like to think at least I have a specific skill set that fits well in my job, and I do it pretty well. So I can walk away at the end of the day, regardless of how, say, a case turned out, that I tried my best, I did my best, and it was fulfilling for me. That it may have done some good, it may have done absolutely nothing for all I know, but at least I tried, and I can go away saying, I tried, best of my abilities, and it's good. And my skill sets are being utilized, I'm not being underutilized in that sense, and that gives me satisfaction, I guess.
It's true. So like, if there's actually like a law student who has graduated and is like torn between, let's say, legal practice and something like you guys do, like, what would your advice be to them in that sense?
Well, my advice would be if you just graduated and you have some, let's say, financial flexibility to it, because that's a really realistic consideration, right? If you can't afford to pay for your meals, then don't talk about going volunteering around somewhere, just figure out yourself out first. But practically, internship opportunities are abundant, volunteer opportunities are quite common, and even if, say, you cannot commit to either of these things, being on the peripheral of it, listening to forums, public engagement, discussion, it's something that you can kind of keep your eyes on to see, is this something that I might remotely be interested in pursuing a career in? Because most of the time, unlike government, for example, you can't exactly see how government functions from the outside. But NGO, because a lot of the engagement things you do are in public sphere. It's either on the media, you can go to a public forum, you can actually meet the person, talk to them, you can actually spend some time on the sidelines kind of figuring out what these people do, how they do it, and how they operate. So I would say, if you've got a chance, if you are, say, a CLP graduate, practice and preparation should be done early because it does take up a good chunk of your life in that sense. But during that time, you can always make yourself available to learn more. And coming from a legal background, that's a perk of it. Everyone needs some degree of legal expertise, not necessarily to advise you on law per se, but to assist with research, to go through documents. There's a lot of soft skill that a legal graduate would have that most NGO will find very useful to have even as a volunteer. So there are that kind of opportunities. But if someone is more daring or adventurous, they can always just take like a gap year before they start with their legal profession or their further education and just jump into working for an NGO for a while. As a volunteer or even as an intern, why not?
Yeah, true. So like, how how would you advise them to like direct themselves into the direction you're in right now? Because like when a law student goes through law school and all this, what they usually expect, advise otherwise, is like fame, money, and reputation, that sort of things. But here at Soram, as a legal person here, you don't really get that sort of what do you call that thing, right? So,
well, I mean, if you pursue fame and money at one point, I mean, the world is a very diverse place, right? You will have people that will be very happy if he gets 1 million a month, and literally he'll be the happiest dude alive. But then you have people that will have millions of dollars, but they'll never be happy because they don't feel fulfilled. So at one point, you know, if you think fame and money is something that attracts you, by all means pursue it first. Because at one point, once you've gotten there, and then you might realize that actually I want more. And then you decide then and make a change of heading. It's never too late. That's the nice thing about, I think, about human rights or activism in general. There is no upper age limit. Like if you want to join the armed forces, you want to join police force, there's actually an upper limit. If you're older than a certain age, you can't join because you're physically not fit enough for it anymore, right? But for human rights or even politics or even legal profession, that's the beauty of this kind of more social profession. You deal with people, it's mostly experience and human relation of how you deal with it. So at any point of time, if you tried out your life and say, this is not for me, I want to try this, you can jump into it. Like if you're 50 years old, there's nothing stopping you from doing a law degree and doing CLP and chamber and come out.
not wrong.
Yeah. So there's that benefit for human rights too. Like I know a few activists that essentially were professional engineers for a good 40, 50 years in their life. And then when they retired, they were following politics at one point, and then they realized, hey, this is a worthwhile cause, I want to invest my time in it. And they just volunteer themselves, invest themselves, read themselves, make themselves a knowledgeable person in this subject area, and engage in the process. So it's very easy for people to jump in later on. So there's, you can try fame, wealth, everything you want, and then come back. Or if someone wants fame and join this field also, has happened, will always happen, because most of the time we are under spotlight. And NGO is, in that sense, a relatively quick way into politics for some. So there have been people like that. Not to say that you should join if you want fame and wealth, but it is a pathway. There's a few ministers who used to be Swaram, so you can kind of Google out their portfolio, their CV, and kind of find out. So.
Yep. But even for fame and wealth, I would say it's not actually mutually exclusive with legal practice. There are also firms that specialize, that work closely with us as well, representing, say, victims and all that. So even in legal practice, there is its own opportunities within that field as well.
But like working here, I think for you guys, do you feel like it's given you something that you cannot get elsewhere except for here?
Oh, for sure. For us, it's a lot more clear-cut because we do have something that's exclusively to us, like a human rights report. You don't get to write there if you work at NGO. You get to write maybe a thematic report on freedom of expression, but you don't really get the kind of scale that the kind of report that we do.
But you can always do it like for like at a side job, like say as a hobby.
No,
That's
some
possible
you can,
as well.
some you can't. Like for us, what really gives our report a bit of flavor is we have the cases on the ground. So we can kind of give you the macro perspective that any researcher can do, because essentially you just need to tell Parliament, make sure some MPs that you know can help you ask questions and you can get the data. But the kind of micro scale of how this system functions or how something can go wrong, you can't read it from macro data, and you can't get those data with your external researcher. You need to be on the ground for most part to get a sense of it and get a feel of it. So that's, I think, one thing that we definitely have here that most other NGOs may not have. They would have in their own specific area of work, but not a holistic, overall, overarching one.
So this is like something, I would say special, that you can't actually get elsewhere. So human rights infringement, Mr. Sia, so what actions can be taken in the event like your human rights have been infringed?
Usually I think we probably start with police report itself, that ironically sometimes gets fudged around, unfortunately, but aside from that being the first step, usually I would say public scrutiny. Like for detention without trial, usually you want to bring attention to it, so then they'll start moving around a bit more cautiously, as in they know they're being watched and everything, public, like, as in not just public scrutiny, because sometimes with public scrutiny comes scrutiny from the officials itself. MACC or say EAIC will also will start taking note as well. But on the other side, hold on.
Well, I kind of thought like the first thing you would say is that, oh, you guys should come to us, that sort of thing. Because like, isn't that like one of the steps that people can
Well,
take, right?
If you think about it, Malaysia right now we have a population about 30 million going to 31 or 32, I think.
Yeah.
There's 7 of us in the office. So if you divide it up that way, that's like 4 million per person.
But there are like other NGOs around as well, right?
If you add up all the NGO, I'm pretty sure the Malaysian NGO people who are working in a capacity where they can provide support in that sense, or paralegal assistance, you would have no more than 1,000 people. So that's still one person to God knows how many Malaysians. So it is incomprehensible and also completely insane if you think that any NGOs can help in totality. Like NGOs can set a trend of this is what you can do to get out of it. But getting out of it itself needs to be done by the person themselves.
Yep. I would say, as an organization, we provide the support structure and framework for them to progress through it, but the initiative still has to come from them. As in, we don't want to be paternalistic in the sense that we come in and solve the problem for you, and it's also beyond our capacity. Like, say, police report, PDRM wouldn't let us in and make the report on behalf of the victim.
That's true. So like, let's say you start off with going to make a police report. So like, how does it start off? Like, let's say if you actually said something you shouldn't, how do you actually go to the police to report about that? Wouldn't that just get you detained instead, right?
Depends. I mean, depends on what the context was, right? I mean, if, say for example, you said something and there was a group of people that threatened you because they say this is inappropriate and things like that, well, that itself already tells you something, right? There's someone threatening you. You can always say that was criminal intimidation at play. Whether the police respond to it in your favor or arrest you, that to some extent doesn't matter, because the point is you have identified that I have exercised my right, and my right is being threatened or undermined by a third party or the state, doesn't matter. Your police report essentially, for lack of a better word, is a poor man's statutory declaration. To just say, this is what I have said, this is what I believe, and I don't think I committed any wrong because A, B, C, D, E, F, G. This is my report. So sometimes it's not even something they want action on, it's just a declaration that this is it.
See, but like, let's say in my exercising of freedom of speech, I may have like misphrased something, and then someone's threatening me, let's say, and then when I go to the police, and then I tell them what I say, and then they detain me, like what do I do?
Well, I mean, that so far don't usually happen unless you say something that's very controversial and there's already a warrant out for you in the first place. But say if that does happen to you, well, the thing is, freedom of expression doesn't mean freedom after expression. That's the sad reality of it. It is a starting point to some extent. Like, say if you do say something that's very controversial, like say Malaysia should not have a royal institution, it should be abolished, and someone lodge a police report against you and threaten your physical safety. Even if you did commit sedition, by the definition of the word sedition, or even less majestic, for example, if you have that law, it doesn't justify physical threat or violence against you. So when you stand for your right, it's not just like your right of expression. That is something you find out in court later if you're arrested. But if it's just someone threatening you because you express something, the police report itself to point out violence against a free thought itself is wrong. And that also needs to be highlighted. So it's a two-part.
And most importantly, it puts it on record so people can't change the story. That's the most important part. Like say if you got abused, they can't just later say you fell down the staircase.
True. Yeah, that's true.
Or sometimes even if there's no abuse, like even procedural errors, putting it on record will highlight.
So first thing to do, make a police report. It's that.
That's the most easiest one.
And I think even in court, for like say evidence, if there are procedural errors, there are some grounds to make it inadmissible as well. So hence why the documentation is important.
Yeah, that should. Okay, so let's move on from that. So in Malaysia, can human rights actually truly be protected? And like, how does one, let's say, exercise and protect their right throughout their lives, like daily lives, or their, like, let's say, freedom of speech, that sort of thing. So, like, if they exercise it, how do they protect it?
I think fundamentally, saying that we can protect human rights kind of imply that we are very flexible, that we can change, because human rights is very flexible and very dynamic. So saying able to protect it in full is kind of saying that you can be as flexible to account for everything that happens. And it's very difficult for that to happen actually, because it's always a moving yardstick. I'll give you an example. Like Malaysia traditionally, protests is not seen as a right. there was the old Police Act 1967 that anyone that's more than a gathering of 3 persons is technically an assembly and it's unlawful without a permit. So essentially 4 of you coming here together used to be an offense, as absurd as it is. And when we did have a change in law, essentially to say that was not right or that was unconstitutional, when we had a change of law and peaceful assembly is introduced, the yardstick moved. So now your freedom of assembly is not just, you can't gather with 3 or more persons, but it becomes something that you have the inherent right to peaceful assembly, and it can be protected, but at the same time you have issues where the police says you need a permit, when that system doesn't exist. So the yardstick kind of changed along the way, and every step along the way, it's kind of like an expanding game. So imagine right now you have stage 1, you clear stage 1, you have the right to gather, but how you gather or the method of gathering itself is still restricted. So you have protected basic, now you can protect this. So it's always this tiered game that you have to go to. At start, it might be something that's very fundamental. Like say, for example, if you go to North Korea right now, your basic fundamental thing is not your freedom of expression. It's your right to life and security of person. Because you can just disappear in the middle of the night and just gone, right? So unless you can have that first tier, then you can't move to the greater political freedom. So it's always a tier system. So can we protect it in whole? Realistically, I think we can never go more than a certain degree, 75%. Even if a state is very genuine with it, because the thing is we would have technological changes, cultural changes, societal changes, and that's going to change the yardstick of human rights. And then you're going to always have one guy that fell asleep at the wrong time, literally or figuratively, right? Like say for example, if you're a prison warden on duty, say for example, the past 10 years in Malaysia, no one had died in custody, but then one day you're a prison warden, your wife left you, your kid got kidnapped, you were suffering from a flu, all at the same time for some whatever reason that you were that unlucky and you were still forced to go to work. And in your concern or busy mind, it slipped your mind that this inmate looks like he was very ill. And he passed away and became the first custodial death in 10 years' time. What are you going to do about it? The state has all the mechanisms to prevent it, but human factor can still come into it and it could still cause problems.
So it's something that we as a society need to do ourselves in a sense, right?
So, but unfortunately, it's do ourselves, but also society needs to understand that human rights is not an end game of its own. It's a process, and process would always you have your downtime, you have uptime, you have better improvement, you have period where it's stagnant. But it's a process that's always evolving, ever changing. So we can't say, oh, this is right, this is the way forward, and this is what we do, and stick with it. It needs to evolve along with the time.
I see. Alright, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, let's move on to another question. So far in court, how many cases are there on human rights? On an estimation, through experience,
Quoting a criminal lawyer, almost all criminal cases in Malaysia is a human rights issue.
because they get detained without trial. Is that it?
Detention without trial is one part, but the condition of detention itself is another part. Or how detention process is formulated or utilized itself is one part. Or how you hear very often is you were remanded for 4 days or 3 days, but the investigating officer does nothing to you for the first 3 days. Until the last 6 hours, they suddenly bring you to question and don't have enough time, so they extend the remand again. So those in that its own way is a human rights violation. So it's pretty common. But I would say really, really nasty cases, that's really the kind of case that makes you go with the blank eye of how did that even happen? Happens a lot less frequently, maybe no more than 20, 30 cases a year that's really, really severe. They're the kind that really makes you wonder how did it even happen or gone this wrong. It's actually quite rare in that sense. But small things happens very often.
Small things?
Yeah. Like you were not given the right medication when you're in detention, or someone was sexually harassed in the workplace but then no one wants to deal with it, or say a minor in high school was sexually assaulted by the teacher but the Ministry of Education refused to do anything, but then actually there's a criminal investigation going on. So very minor things, and might not be something that's no solution to it. The solution might already be on the way, but it's just very, very slow. So you have a lot of those kind of very small, relatively small cases. It's severe on its own, but on the greater scale of things, it's not something that will shock the whole world and it will change or destabilize the whole institution kind of thing. It's things that happen because how the world is sometimes, or how people are, or like this one I described, right? Some guy just made one mistake and someone died.
Yeah. So do these cases ever go to court, or do they just died off on their own?
Some of them do, not all of them. Because what we need to understand is human rights violation is fundamentally a misconduct. It's like you look around the world, no government in their right mind, barring a few, would say you have no rights.
Yeah.
All government will on paper say you have the full rights and liberty of person, you can do whatever you want, and then with a small little but.
Yeah.
So most countries are like that, and because of that, most of the time when you do have a very severe human rights violation, or even a minor one, most of the time you'll try to rectify it before it goes to public records. So like say for example, if you are remanded in that manner, like you were remanded for 4 days, no investigation was done to you, and suddenly the IO say, oh, actually I want to take a statement, let me extend his remand for 3 more days. Your lawyer will be able to challenge it in court, and you'll be able to break it. And most of the time the police won't want to pursue it because they already know, oh, actually I should not have done that. Even on my own processes or my procedures, officially, I'm not supposed to do that. So most of the time they will have a degree of de-escalation or backing off. And most of the time it will resolve at that. It doesn't really require a legal challenge per se.
So usually it won't go public in court, right?
Yes.
Yeah. As in, they don't really want the visibility that comes with a court case as well, because it then becomes public record usually.
And then you come to the attention of the public. Then
Yeah, because like what I say, on the minor scale, even from the NGO side, we frequently just get us in for questioning or explain what's going on. But it rarely escalates beyond that, I think.
Because you can imagine if, say for example, we get called in almost every time after a peaceful assembly that we were seen there.
I think average a monthly basis.
Yeah, pretty much a monthly basis. But the thing is, right now there's a bit of a status quo that people are unclear whether Section 9(5), the part of the law of peaceful assembly where you need to give police a notice.
yeah.
So it used to be it was declared unconstitutional by Court of Appeal, and then a separate bench said it's constitutional. So there's always a big grey area there whether it's constitutional to have a gathering without notice to the police. If they take us to court right now and we challenge it and we win, they can't use that law anymore, ever. Whereas the grey area right now allows them to call us in for questioning.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes when they pursue something, either side, it will change the dynamics for better or for worse.
That makes, true.
Another example I think of that might be interesting, especially for law students, it's how Section 232 of the Communication and Multimedia Act. So that section has been used to penalize a lot of political expression in the past. Nowadays, you see mostly deal with hate speech, insulting religion, or things they are investigating on penal code and then they use it as supplementary, right? So back then, everyone that was arrested had this tendency of being compelled or during interrogation or intimidated to plead guilty. Then you have 3 cases that's very prominent that all 3 refused to plead guilty and went to trial. And all 3 has set a very different precedent of how the case can be conducted or needs to be conducted. And all 3 of them has very severe implications because right now if you're the next in line, you also try the same thing. So one was Zaid Ibrahim who was charged for insulting Najib. His lawyer essentially managed to argue at one point until the point that the judge essentially ruled, if you cannot subpoena the Prime Minister or the former Prime Minister to come and testify in court that his feelings are hurt by the posting, the case is dismissed. And then you have another case of Imam Khalid Ismail in Johor, where his case they challenged the technicality of the evidence proving that he made a posting. And that also set on a new precedent that any other case that you go through at one point will need to show all this kind of technical information and data. And it's almost impossible to collect all of that. So sometimes when they pursue the matter in court itself, it would cause further problem to them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's true. Makes a lot of sense actually. So, okay, let's just move on. So, for the current issues in Malaysia, so like we've spoken before about the cases, so like currently what are the major issues that Malaysia is facing with regards to human rights?
The biggest one?
Let's say top 3.
Let's say top 3 reasons I think
Detention.
for me, detention will be one of them. Because essentially that detention undermines a lot of what the other fundamental liberty is. If there's no guarantee that you'll be given fair treatment in the criminal justice system, and that the criminal justice system itself is skewed in some angle, some ways, like for example, you don't trust the judiciary to decide fairly on you, right? That would essentially undermine everything else that the judiciary would have power over. Civil cases, contracts, any negotiation that fall through that you could turn to a judiciary to be an independent arbiter. If you can't have that trust anymore, that fundamentally is going to ruin a lot of things in the country. So the kind of matter of how criminal justice system works. Democratic space is another big one. That's related more to expression. Because right now if you look at Malaysia, we have a lot of rights on paper, but fulfillment of the rights is very challenging. Like if you want to express yourself or your political views right now, what avenue do you actually have? Going Facebook and shouting it out, yeah, sure, you're expressing your view, but it doesn't mean it's conveyed in any structural way. Like say for example, you see tomorrow, let's say death penalty, right? It's up for abolition. And if you really fundamentally disagree with it, how do you channel that thought forward? Do you get to talk to your MP and discuss about it? Is there a public town hall meeting where you can give your comments in a very rational, well way, not just like screaming at you and say, no, it's bad, go away kind of thing, but to rationally debate or discuss it? We don't have that kind of avenue or space. So if you look at other countries, we usually call it civic space. But essentially that space is almost non-existent in Malaysia, and it's very hard to get it back up again. And the last one I think would be your right to association.
Right to association.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now association is still very strictly regulated in Malaysia by the Registrar Society. So even if you have a book club you want to register, there's no guarantee that you can get your registration too. And it's also very arbitrary in that sense. So even if they say no, you can't really find out why they say no. Like for example, if you have a book club on political studies, and the registrar says no, they don't tell you why it's no, but behind the scene it could be, oh, do they mean political studies of communism? Because that's a no-no in Malaysia, right? Let's just say if you agree with that. But the thing is, you never know how do you even challenge it. How do you know what to rectify, what the concerns are? So that's that kind of gap, the three big gaps, I think.
Three big gaps.
Yeah.
Okay, so, alright, I think that would be all.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chiu, and thank you, Mr. Sia.
Alright.
So, that will be all for this month's Legal Academy. Tune in next time.